Hi there, Jared. Good to talk to you as always. So now we're seeing the US really try to dismantle the global trade system. What's going to be the fallout?
That's a great question. I think what we're seeing with the Trump administration is they are trying to get reindustrialization. They're trying to get more tax revenue, and they are trying to get non-economic benefits from these tariffs. But it's still too early to tell. And also, I think my question in all of this is, how do the allies respond? You can see in Canada and the EU that they have retaliated with tariffs. Australia has not. But are we going to see what happened in 2017, 2018, 2019 when Australia and Japan worked together to try to provide some sort of stability to at least Asia's economic architecture moving forward? And that's my big question moving forward from here.
Do you think there's also countries just willing to roll over and play dead because they think it's not going to change anything anyhow?
Right. So I think we're touching on an issue of Donald Trump's thinking where the might will do what they can and the weak will suffer what they must. But I think this flies in the face of the rules-based order. And that's something that has, on the whole, been more in favor of U.S. long-term interests than not. So right now, this is sort of it's too early to tell. It's easy to forget we're still in the very early weeks of the Trump administration. If there's anything we've learned about Donald Trump is that, yes, he has always been consistent on tariffs. And yes, he often goes with a maximalist approach in his negotiations. But more often than not, he does come to a negotiated settlement and a negotiated end state. And so I think what I'm looking at is, where are those negotiations and what exactly do those negotiations look like?
Is it all about containing China, to isolate it, to get other countries and companies to withdraw from the supply chain?
I don't think Donald Trump would complain if firms in China were to relocate to the United States. I also don't think any U.S. president would complain about that. But I think my question about this is, you look at the trade negotiations in the first Trump term and how you look at how the U.S. renegotiated the North America Free Trade Agreement between the U.S., Canada, and Mexico to be USMCA, and which, by the way, basically adopted 90% of what the Obama administration had negotiated with the Trans-Pacific Partnership. But a key difference in that negotiation with those three countries is they had more anti-China language in it, more restrictions on China. So are we going to see more of that moving forward, or are we going to see what we also saw in the first Trump administration, President Trump looking for a sort of a trade deal with China to try to come to some sort of agreement with China? Let's not forget that he famously was not someone who cared a lot about the democratic nature of countries like Taiwan, but he did care about the trade balance, and that's been something that has been consistent for many decades now.
It used to be that, just growing up in China and observing China for a long time, I could see the country withstanding its people suffering for these global objectives that he wanted to achieve. And is that what the US is doing as well? And are Americans on board with that?
That's a great question. As you would know, the concept of eating bitterness in China is a lot easier in a non-democratic country. And in the U.S., we don't have that as much. And I think we're already seeing the ramifications of his trade deal. Let's not forget, not only of his trade agenda, I should say, not only do tariffs sort of limit economic growth and make things more expensive and less efficient, but you also have the way that he is doing his tariffs are in the way that there's no business certainty. They are on one day, off the next. It's easy. It's not easy. It's manageable to work around tariffs once you know what they are and you can expect them to go into force. But when they are changing every single day, it's hard to have any business certainty. And lastly, I would just say all of this is inherently inflationary. And they make goods more expensive. And you can look at consumer sentiment in the U.S. and see that most Americans are now expecting inflation to get higher, which by its nature means that they are going to pay more, and which is inflationary. And all of this is not looking great for solving the one issue that, in my view, put Donald Trump back in the White House more than anything else, and that is the economy itself.
Some bitterness might help with the diabetes epidemic. But I also want to ask, what's this going to do to countries forming, their own groupings, and also to the self-reliance strategy of many countries?
That's a great question. I mean, on one hand, you can say the way that Europe has come to the table on Ukraine in particular, and finally ponied up a lot more than they ever did during the Biden administration in terms of what they were willing to commit to Ukraine's survival. You can say that's a great outcome. Well, on the other hand, you can also see that more autonomy for Europe could lead to a distancing from the United States as well. So it can really cut both ways. So once you sort of over and over again make the relationship between these countries more transactional and heavily transactional, and use that leverage, ultimately you lose leverage in the long run. You sort of lose that political capital. So as I was saying earlier, that you lose the one strength, in my view, that the U.S. had more than any other revisionist power, and that is the allies and partners networks that it has around the world, and the goodwill that it has earned around the world. So if you do that sort of maximalist transactional approach and a short-term approach to these relationships, I think it hurts in the long term.
Thank you so much. Appreciate you coming on the show. Jared Mondschein, Director of Research at the United States Studies Center.